It's time for Recipe of the Day. Looking for something simple but elegant for New Year's Eve or New Year's Day? Did you know that it's lucky to eat pork on New Year's Day? Well, I have just the thing for you. This is a pork rib roast. And a pork rib roast is essentially the loin, which is that long cylindrical cut that's very lean that you might be more familiar with, but it still has the rib bones attached to it. So if you want to think about it a different way, it's kind of like a whole bunch of bone-in pork loin chops attached to each other. They haven't been cut apart yet. That's what they are, really. Now, why would you choose the rib roast over the plain loin roast? I think there's two reasons. The first is I find that the roast is juicier, especially along the bone. So you just get a little bit more of that moisture, juiciness. I also like kind of chewing on the bone. If nobody's watching me, I really like that a lot. So that's two reasons, I guess. The other reason is that it makes a nice presentation. Now, I just want to be clear. I'm not talking about the crown roast now. That's the one that's kind of circular with the ribs all pointing up. That is actually the same cut as this, and I will link to what to do with that. But the difference is that it has been put on its side. It's usually two of them that are sort of strung together to make that circular shape. Same cut, just sort of prepared slightly differently. But still, even if you don't have the crown presentation, you can take this rib roast to the table and carve it right at the table. You're just going right between those ribs, and then everybody gets one of these pork chop kind of rib roast pieces. Before I get into how to cook this, I just want to mention one thing. It is almost always the case that a pork rib roast is chined. That means that the long bone running along the whole roast has been removed. Otherwise, it's really impossible really to cut through that. So you just want to kind of make sure that you don't have that there if you're planning to do this, serving it at the table like I was talking about. But I'm 99% sure that you're not going to encounter that because it's not usually sold that way. And the other thing is that sometimes these rib roasts are Frenched. That means that all the meat is removed from those rib bones along the top of it, but sometimes it isn't. Nothing changes for how you prepare it. It just looks a little bit different. I think people like the appearance of the French rib roast better. It's just a little bit fancier. And definitely if you were going to buy a couple of rib roasts or even more, you can do as many as you want to do that crown, that circle, then you definitely want to make sure that they've been Frenched. You can ask your butcher even at a grocery store to do that, and they'll do that for you if it hasn't already been done. Okay, how do you cook this one? You're heating the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you're making a little mixture of dried herbs, salt, and pepper. The dried herbs that you use are up to you. I will link to an herb de Provence mixture because I really like that. An Italian herb blend would be really great here, or whatever flavors you want to use. You could do some thyme and rosemary. So it's about a tablespoon of the dried herbs and then a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of pepper. You're mixing those together and then you're rubbing them all over that pork roast. Now, if you want to, you can score the fat on the pork roast before you do it. You just go with a sharp knife and do cross hatches into the fat, and then you would add your mixture after, but you don't have to do that. It looks nice and it lets the herbs get down into things a little bit, but it doesn't really do anything else. Okay, then you are putting that roast onto a rack in a roasting pan, fat side up. Now, if you don't have an oven-safe rack that fits in your roasting pan, you can use a few stalks of celery instead. I do that all the time. You're not going to end up eating that celery, but it just sort of keeps the roast up off the pan so that the heat can circulate around it and get under it, and it cooks more evenly. You're not going to get a lot of drippings from this roast, so if you wanted to make gravy, you're probably going to want to go with a recipe for gravy that doesn't use drippings, and I will link to that for you. You will get some drippings though, and so what is a really great thing to do is to put just a little bit of broth or stock, unsalted, into the bottom of the roasting pan. You need maybe half an inch, and then any drippings that come off of that roast are going to land in that liquid, and they're not going to burn onto the roasting pan because you're going to get so little in the way of drippings. They do risk getting burnt down there, and so the water liquid that you're putting in that pan broth, it's going to prevent that from happening. If you're not hoping to make gravy though, you don't have to do that. So it's just if you want to make the gravy and you want to get any drippings that do come from the roast to be part of that gravy. Okay, so now that is going into your 350 degree Fahrenheit oven for 20 to 25 minutes per pound. Now that's going to get you to the range of 145 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. I've told you about this before. It used to be the case that we had to cook pork to 160 degrees Fahrenheit for it to be safe. And that is quite white. That's like a well done piece of pork if you were comparing it to, say, a steak or like a roast beef or something. Okay. Now, the recommendations have changed. The USDA changed these a while ago now, and it now is safe to have pork at 145 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just because the bacteria that we were worrying about is way less prevalent in the United States now, and so it's not something that we are concerned with. So 145 degrees Fahrenheit is now the safe temperature. Having said that, many people have grown up having pork that is never even the tiniest bit pink. It's always very white, very well cooked, and they don't like that tinge of pinkness that you get when you're at 145 for the pork. If that is you, you're going to want to aim for closer to 150, 155, 160 before you're taking your roast out of the oven. If you're interested in trying the pork at that safe 145 temperature, which just has a little bit of pink, then you're going to want to take it out a little bit sooner. Start testing that temperature a little bit earlier. It's going to come out at 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and that is going to be moister and juicier. It's not going to be dry, which is an issue that we do encounter when we're having pork loin because it's such a lean cut of meat. So this is one time when the 145 would be really, really beneficial. If you're doing like a pork butt or pork shoulder, I mean, like pulled pork, that is cooked actually way past 160. That could be up at like 180, even 210 when slow cooked. And that gives it that really sort of melt in your mouth, stringy, beautiful texture. But that's because there's a lot of fat and all of that inside of that pork roast. It's not lean like the loin. And so when you cook it to that higher temperature, it's not drying out because it has its own moisture protecting itself. This loin, this rib rack, it does not have that. So the lower temperature is going to be juicier and better. Okay, you pull that out when it gets to the temperature that you want, cover it with foil, cover the whole roasting pan with foil, and let it rest for 30 minutes. Then you're increasing the oven up to 475 degrees Fahrenheit because we're doing the reverse sear here. Then you're going to put the roast into either a clean roasting pan or take it out of the roasting pan, get rid of any juices or anything in there, give it a wipe out, and then put it back into the roasting pan and back into the hot oven. The reason for that is just because you're going into that hot oven, any juices or anything that are in that roasting pan could burn onto the pan and you don't want that. Now, if you have that liquid in there for the gravy, I also recommend that you take that out while the roast is resting because you can be making your gravy in that time. So you've got your clean roasting pan or wiped out roasting pan with the roast in it, doesn't need the celery at this point, goes into that hot oven, 475 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. That's going to give the meat a nice and brown crust. And then when it comes out, you can carve that roast immediately. It already rested. So you're carving between the ribs, giving each person one of those like pork chop servings, and dig in. I know you're going to love this one. If you try this recipe or any recipe from Cook the Story or from my sister's site, The Cookful, and you love it, I would love it if you would go and leave a comment and a 5-star rating. Those 5-star ratings actually really help me because they show up in Google search results, and then it makes people more likely to click on them and come and visit my site. So that is really helpful to me, but it's also really helpful to other readers and other listeners because they see those 5 stars and then they know that you liked it. They know it's delicious, and then they're more likely to try it too. I know that many of you have been leaving those comments and ratings, and I am very grateful. If you haven't done it before, but you have made a recipe from one of my sites that you've enjoyed, please go and do it now. Thank you so much. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.